Hello, fellow YouTube traveler. First and foremost, happy Pride Month! Even if it is the last week of Pride Month. Who asked? Anyways, my name's Sophia, and this is a special month for me. This is my first Pride Month ever since I started understanding who I was and being honest and authentic with myself. It's been a long journey of self-acceptance and learning, and I wanted to take some time and share it with you all, if you're willing to listen. So this all started back in October of 2023. Well, actually, this all started back in September of 2023. Well, actually, this all started back in November of 2020. Well, actually, you know what? This is all just going to get really complicated really fast, so I'll try and just give you all the highlights, and then we'll get to all the important stuff, okay? I'll keep this part brief. I grew up in a conservative Christian household. I was very polarized with the idea of the gender binary. There was men, there was women, there was no in between, and there was no crossing over to the other side. I didn't really understand the differences between men and women when I was younger, but once I did, I think I always kind of had a curiosity of what being a woman was like. I never really considered myself to be a girl before all of this. I always kind of knew that I was a guy. So I never really had any experience with LGBTQ plus people until college, I think it was. It wasn't really that I had bad blood with the community, nor were people around me openly phobic, but there was no shortage of voices that I kept hearing constantly that was saying the cishet lifestyle was the only way to go, and if you're not cishet, you're gonna burn in hell! Oh no! As a result of all this upbringing, I kind of subconsciously othered anyone on the LGBTQ plus spectrum. I had several signs growing up that maybe I wasn't quite as cis as I would have initially liked to believe I was, but I can talk about that in a different video. Two more things I want to mention before I get started with the rest of this video. In college, I did have a couple of gay friends, but I never knew anyone who was trans. And looking back on it, I did know two people that I think were trans that I was only able to potentially infer with the help of social media. But at the time, I only knew them pre-transition, so I didn't get the chance to ask them about any other sorts of transitioning things during and after. It's a little bit of a lost opportunity, but at the time, I didn't know. So, let's talk about how I knew. So it wasn't until I moved out on my own when I really started interacting with the LGBTQ plus community. I spent a lot of time on YouTube and Twitch, especially during the pandemic, and on November 2020, I actually decided that I wanted to try doing my own content creation, under a different persona, of course. I tried that for a couple of years. It never really went anywhere, unfortunately, but I made several close friends that I still interact with after I left the VTubing scene. And I think most of them are LGBTQ plus in some form. In hindsight, that probably should have been a giveaway. There are three friends that I am especially close with to this day, and each of those three have a role to play in my story. We'll get to them as the time comes. So yeah, after leaving the scene for my own personal reasons, I just kind of existed. Wanted to get caught up on a bunch of things I kind of wanted to experience on stream, knowing that I wouldn't really have the chance anymore, so I figured, why not just do it for myself? So I did. Enter September 2023. One of my friends was planning to go to a furry con, and I took a look at it, and it was a little bit of a drive, but I was totally willing to go to meet up with them. And also, it was a dinosaur-themed convention, so you'll probably get this impression as time goes on, but I am very much a huge dinosaur nerd, so I had to go. Anyways, I went to the con, I met my friend, and I had a great time. There's probably a rule on the internet somewhere that says if you go to a furry con for any reason, you officially cannot deny that you are a furry anymore, but yeah, I didn't care. Honestly, being a furry is not so bad. I know, hot take, especially considering that I was in a lot of places on the internet where being a furry was seen as the butt of the joke, but I didn't care. I had a great time. I got to meet a good friend. And honestly, it was time and money well spent. Anyways, after going to that furry con, it gave me the courage to look more inside of myself and start to question some more things about myself that I may or may not have been denying and been wrong about. Foreshadowing is a literary device in which this past October was a pivotal month for me. Thanks to all my previous experiences that I've had, I was finally determined enough to open the box that I shoved back into my mental closet for basically all of my life. I was now ready to start being honest with myself. There are 3 videos that I watched that helped me mentally get to the point where I was ready to start opening up to myself fully. 2 of them come from the same person. You've probably seen Azeel online, especially if you're watching a furry in VR chat. There's a good chance you've seen his content. Anyways, there was one video that I saw that kind of got that snowball starting to roll. It's not the one you're thinking of, actually. It's a different one. This one. Specifically, there was actually one part in it that kind of stuck in my brain more than it had any right to.
Virtual reality is something I looked at because that kind of closes the gap in a way. That and I get to be a chick.
Yo! Would you say you identify as trans?
I'll be 100% honest, kinda, but I didn't want to take any of the inherent risks that comes with transitioning. I guess I should say I'm happy enough where I'm at. I could go either way. I have my preferences, but I don't have, I guess, the fortitude or strength to commit to that kind of thing because I am very critical of my own appearance and own well-being. Even if I'm never going to see another person again, I'm still going to see me. And that's the kind of thing that kept me from going at it. But at least I still have, virtual reality.
I have some people you should talk to for sure, because talking to the right people about that stuff makes a huge difference. And you at least deserve the counsel that people with experience can give you.
So after seeing the conversation and that scene in that video, that just kind of got my mind starting to think about things. Things I hadn't had the courage to think about before. And honestly, I didn't know what to do with those thoughts. So I decided to submit my story, potentially, as an interview for Azeel. At the time, I still very much thought, still cis though, and I thought the fake internet place would be cool. By submitting my story, I had set into motion events that could not be undone. Just by sending my story out into the ether, even anonymously, was a huge step for me. Before, I never told anyone that I was anything other than cishet. The fact that I was able to just crack open that door, even slightly, was a huge step for me. 24 hours later, guess what video he uploads? You can't just do that to a questioning person and expect them to be okay! So, naturally I joined this academy for some questioning reasons, and was still very much cis. Naturally. And then, there was one more video. It was late at night, and I was just looking through YouTube recommended videos, just for something to pass the time and burn the midnight oil. What I found was a video that would change my life. The Incel to Trans Pipeline, and Inside Mari by SecoCat.
The male gender is broken. Let's face it, if you present as male...
Of course, I've heard of the manga that she was talking about for a while. I never read it though, but it was interesting to see it from the perspective of a trans woman. I, of course, wouldn't describe myself as an incel, but I do have a lot of experience just kind of being isolated, especially after the pandemic. So she talked about her experiences growing up, and I kind of realized that although we had some different life milestones, there were a few key points that were hauntingly similar to my own feelings. A lot of things started to rhyme with my own experience, and I wasn't sure how I was feeling about that. And then she showed her face. In that moment, I needed to ask myself some questions. And in that moment, I was ready to be fully and completely honest with myself. Whatever the answers were, I was ready to act on them. Have I really been repressing that much in my mind? Have I really been making a mistake by hiding this for so long? Am I actually trans? I grew up where English is my primary and, so far, only language. And I still struggle to find words to describe how much pain, fear, terror, and general anxiety I felt when I finally was able to open up to myself. The best way I can describe it is that my brain went through its own Chernobyl. I knew immediately in that moment that things had forever changed, and there was no going back. Every single chain that I used to try and bind and control my trans desires snapped. The cis mask that I wore for so long shattered to dust before my eyes. And as I said, I couldn't undo it. After seeing that video, I had a panic attack for a solid week. In that moment, though, I knew I had to hold on to that pain. I had to mold that pain into action, or I was afraid that I wouldn't do anything. I was afraid if I'd let it go, I'd go back to repressing, and when my brain would break again, things would be so much worse. Luckily, two of my closest friends that I knew from my streaming days, see, we're getting back to those, were also trans. I tried talking to them that night, but unfortunately, they were both busy. So, with nowhere else to turn, I had to look up the Trans Lifeline and Trevor Project. I knew about those two charities, but never really had a reason to interact with them before. So this was a new experience for me. I talked to someone at the Trevor Project since they had a chat box, and at the time, I wasn't ready to use my voice to talk to a stranger about the things that I was feeling. In hindsight, I should have talked to someone at Trans Lifeline because I was a little bit too old for the ideal age range for the Trevor Project, but I was incredibly stressed out from having my egg crack. Cut me some slack, okay? Despite this, the people at the Trevor Project were still willing to hear me out and give me the resources that I needed. I'm grateful to the person who was on the other end that night, who was able to hear me out. The next night, I was finally able to talk with one of my friends from my streaming days. He gave me a listening ear, and for the first time, I was truly able to open up to someone about my story and about being trans. It helped knowing that I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I talked with my other friend, and after that, I started my own Discord chat where I was able to grab all the people whom I was starting to get the strength to talk to about being trans and get some advice from them. I was making my own support group, and I really needed that help. That week was still one of the worst weeks of my life. I was having so much trouble sleeping. My appetite was getting increasingly terrible. And as I said, I was still having panic attacks. It wasn't until I was able to get an online therapist's help before I finally started to calm down. This was a therapist that was recommended to me from the Trevor Project whenever I contacted them. And without him, again, I probably would not be comfortable with who I am for a while. I was nervous talking with him at first, but once I was able to fully open up, lay all my cards on the table, and I was just saying, I need some help. I am genuinely having panic attacks. In a few messages, he was able to help me sort out my mind and get me off the brink of those panic attacks. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I was able to start functioning kind of normally instead of having my emotions spiral out of control. That was when I knew that my mind was in good hands with this particular therapist. At the time, I just needed someone to kind of pre-process the thoughts I was having. So I can talk about that experience later, but I'll just say right now, it was what I needed. So with that, the worst mental crisis that I remember ever having was starting to pass. I still had, and still have, a lot of work to do to get my mind back under my control, but I was starting to take the first steps. I had the courage and desperation to do so. So, talking with my friends and my new therapist, I was starting to put my psyche back together after it shattered in one night. And I was looking for ways to experiment with my identity because, well, I didn't really want to be a guy anymore, so I needed to figure that out. My friend group suggested I get into VR Chat RP, but I never really had the time and energy to get too involved with it. Instead, I found the rave scene. And my story about getting into that is also a long one. I never really imagined myself a VR chat raver, but to get into my history, I need to bring up one of my other friends. This was someone that I met a little bit before my egg cracked, but was someone I really connected with after. For anonymity's sake, I will call her Yuki. That seems like a good name for her. So, Yuki and I first met in VR chat with the Ruby game that there is here. We shared an interest in sign language thanks to a mutual friend. As I said, I never really imagined myself getting into the virtual rave scene, but Yuki was really starting to get involved with that, so I started going to spend more time with her. So I started going to raves for at least a few weeks. I was having a good time, but I never really knew how to ingrain myself in the scene. And it was around mid-November, I think it was, where I finally opened up to Yuki. And ever since that night, she has been one of my best friends who has tremendously helped me figuring out my identity. I will say, could I have figured things out on my own without her? Yes, but it would have been a lot more difficult. The fact that she had already kind of went through what I was starting to go through and just provide a listening ear and advice whenever I needed it, it really meant so much to me. So yeah, we hung out for several months together in the VR chat rave scene. We were both having a good time. And then eventually she left the rave scene. And after she was going, I didn't really have much of an interest in staying, so I left too. To this day, we are still the best of friends. She is an amazing person who was willing and able to offer a helping hand to me when I was floundering in the worst mental crisis I'd ever had. Every day, I'm grateful I get to call her my friend. During the turn of the new year, I kind of had an idea to try making an alternate VR chat account to experiment with a different name. So I wanted to go back and forth initially between my main and my new alternate account, but it got too much of a hassle really quick. So I decided I wanted to stay on my alternate account for a little bit and use that name for a while. Spoiler alert, I liked it. A lot. So that's what the name on my main account is. So now let's circle back to the Trans Academy. I wanted to start coming to the Trans Academy a lot more after my egg initially cracked, but unfortunately for the first couple of months, my schedule was too busy and I was unable to do so. So November and December were kind of hard to get through. Eventually though, I was finally able to find the time. I started making friends and I started ingraining myself in this group, and it's been an amazing experience so far. I was finally surrounded by people who had similar experiences to me, and I was able to open up and start letting the true me show. So it's great and all that I was able to start finding myself and get more comfortable with myself in VR chat, but I knew I wanted to start taking some steps IRL to express who I was and who I wanted to be. So I scheduled a doctor's appointment a few weeks after my egg cracked, and I discussed my options with them and tried to figure out where to go from there. Funny story about that. Even though I was several weeks after my egg cracked, and I take blood pressure medication, all that to say that whenever I went in and had my blood pressure checked, the doctor took a look at it and it was just like, your blood pressure's kind of high. To which I basically was just like, you don't say! So I was forwarded to a short-term in-person counselor who eventually got me connected with more of a long-term counselor that I still see to this day. And I also, of course, talked about medical options. I tried some anti-anxiety meds, thinking maybe that would work. And also, at the time, I was still very much willing to try anything outside of transitioning. I felt like that would be better for my situation. But it didn't really work out too well for me, so I then asked more about hormones, and I found a new doctor who was able to help me out with this type of thing. So, where does that lead me today and into the future? As I've said, I have a new doctor now, who is more of a trans-affirming doctor, and with her help, I am starting to try getting on hormones. Having a little bit of a rocky start on that. I could talk about that later, perhaps. And also, as I've said, I now have a therapist that I have the courage to actually be able to see in person. And Also, one of the steps that I'm starting to take on my gender affirmation process is a new name. I started going to him with my birth name, but eventually I decided I wanted to try a different name. Not my birth name, not my chosen name, but something in between while I'm still transitioning. As for VR chat, I still have many friends in here, and I think I have told pretty much all of them that I need to, that I am trans, and I am me. And now, here I am, on YouTube. Hopefully this is going to be the first of many videos I put up on here. I want to discuss so many things from both a trans and a Christian perspective, but I will do that another time. Anyways, I think I've rambled on long enough. You've heard enough from this fairy creature for however long this video ends up being. So, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Feel free to hit the like button and subscribe and comment down below. Whatever. I don't really know where to put my hands for this. I'll try and learn. But, yeah. I think that is everything I want to talk about. I'm not sure if I've said this before, but this is my first Pride Month. The first Pride Month since I started being honest with myself and who I am and what I wanted for myself. It's a terrifying journey, but one that I know I need to make. And I hope that you all are willing to join me in this. So, that's everything. My name's Sophia. Nice to meet ya. And may the light of the stars be your comfort and guide in the darkest of nights. Until next time, bye!